Hi and welcome to this podcast from 1914 to 1918 war.com. In this episode we're continuing our reading of Bruce Bairnsfather's book Bullets and Billets. We're up to chapter 5 now. As always, ratings and reviews are gratefully received to help other people find this podcast, and you can check out our Twitter feed at WW1 The Great War. Right, let's get on with chapter 5.
Everything you hold worthwhile is at stake.
Nur durch starke Berührung mit der See können wir den für uns nötigen, weltumspannenden Geistgenot von gewinnen.
Look, that French girl, give me this bunch of flowers. Mercy, ma'am, Billy.
Chapter 5. My Man Friday. Chuck us the biscuit. Relieved. Billets. It was during this first time up in the trenches that I got a soldier servant. As I had arrived only just in time to go with the battalion to the trenches, the acquisition had to be made by a search in the mud. I found a fellow who hadn't been an officer's servant before, but who wanted to be. I liked the look of him, so feeling rather like Robinson Crusoe when he booked up Friday, I got me a man. He lived in a dugout about 5 yards away, and from then onwards continued with me right through to the point where this book finishes. This fellow of mine did all my cooking, such as it was, and worked in conjunction with my friend, the platoon commander's servant. Cooking, at the times I write about, consisted of making innumerable brews of tea and opening tins of bully and macaroni. Occasionally bacon had to be fried in a mess tin lid. One day my man soared off into culinary fancies and curried a macaroni. I have never quite forgiven him for this. I am nearly right again now. These two soldier servants never had to leave the trench. It was their job to try and find something to make a fire with, and to do all they could to keep the water out of our dugout, a task which not one of us succeeded in doing. My plan for sustaining life under these conditions was to change my boots as often as possible. If there wasn't time for this, I used to try and boil the water in my boots by keeping my feet to the fire bucket. I always put my puttees on first, and then a pair of thick socks, and finally a pair of boots. I could, by this means, hurriedly slip off the sodden pair of boots and socks, and slip on another set, which had become fairly dry by the fire. We lived perpetually damp, if not thoroughly wet. My puttees, which I rarely removed, were more like long rolls of the constituency of nougat than anything else, thanks to the mud. Dugouts had no wooden linings in those days, no corrugated iron roofs, no floorboards. They were just holes in the clay side of the fire trench, with any old thing for a roof, and old straw or tobacco leaves which we pinched from some abandoned farm for the floor. So you see, there was not much chance of dodging the moisture. The cold was what got me. Personally, I would far rather have gone without food than a fire. A fire of some sort was the only thing to cheer. Coke was scarce and always wet, and it was by no means uncommon to overhear a remark of this sort. "Chuck us the biscuits, Bill, the fire wants mending." At night I would frequently sally forth to a cracked-up village behind, and perhaps procure half a mantelpiece and an old clog to stoke our furnace with. Well, after the usual number of long days and still longer nights spent under these conditions, we came to the day when it was our turn to go out to rest billets, and a relieving battalion to come in. What a splendid day that is! You start packing at about 4 p.m. As soon as it is dusk, the servants slink off across the turnip morass behind and drag our few belongings back to where the limbers are. The limbers have come up from about 3 to 4 miles away from the regimental transport headquarters to take all the trench props back to the billets. We don't leave ourselves until the incoming battalion has taken over. After what seems an interminable wait, we hear a clinking of mess tins and rattling of equipment, the sloshing of feet in muds, and much whispered profanity, which all goes to announce that they're here. Then you know that the other battalion has arrived, and are about to take over those precious slots in the ground. When the exchange is complete, we are free to go out for our few days in billets. The actual going out and getting clear of the trenches takes a long time, handing over and finally extricating ourselves from the morass in the dark with all our belongings is a lengthy process. And then we have about a mile of country which we've never been able to examine in the daytime and get familiar with to negotiate. This is before we get to the high road and really start for billets. I had the different machine gun sections to collect from their various guns, and this not until the relieving sections had all turned up. It was a good 2 hours job getting all the sections with their guns, ammunition and various extras finally collected together in the dark of a mile back, ready to put all the stuff in the limbers and so back to billets. When all was fixed up I gave the order, and off we started, plodding along back down the narrow dreary road towards our resting place. But it was quite a cheerful tramp, knowing as we did that we were going to 4 days' comparative rest and anyway safety. On we went down the long flat narrow roads, occasionally looking round to see the faint flicker of a star shell showing over the top of the trees, and to think momentarily of the poor devils left behind to take our place, and going on doing just what we'd been at. Then finally, getting far enough away to forget, songs and jokes took us chirping along, past objects which soon became our landmarks in the days to come. On we went past estaminet, shrines and occasional windmills, down the long winding road for about 4 miles, until at last we reached our billets, where the battalion willingly halted and dispersed to its various quarters. I and my machine gun section still had to carry on, for we lived apart, a bit further on at the transport farm. So we continued on our own for another 1.5 miles, past the estaminet at Romorin, out towards Neuve-Église to our transport farm. This was the usual red-tiled Belgian farm, with a rectangular smell in the middle. That's the end of Chapter 5 of Bullets and Billets. Hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and I'll look forward to you joining us on the next episode. Thanks for listening.